Science gives you the starting place. It is never the definitive answer. Science gives you the most likely to succeed for most people most of the time. How successful do you want to be?
An expert and a game changer in muscle physiology, health and wellness.
A world expert in all things exercise science and kinesiology. Dr. Andy Galpin.
Your testosterone is low, your testosterone is low. Okay, fine. Why is it low? You'd be surprised how many things we remove from the system and then testosterone just really starts going up. If you're performing well, you're going to live longer. I've just hacked longevity.
Is there a possibility to out-train less than ideal genetics?
Yes, sometimes genetics are irrelevant. Sometimes they're everything. Where does it lie in the middle?
What's your thoughts on pre-workout carbohydrates? I saw a study recently where they were claiming that pre-workout carbohydrates doesn't actually have a huge impact on your performance. Do you agree with that?
So it's not that I believe it or don't believe it. I believe.
Andy Galpin, thank you very much for coming on to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, man. Thank you for asking.
How is it over there in the States right now? All good?
It's amazing. It is a wonderful day today, and there are plenty of trees, and there's some deer out there this morning, so it's a phenomenal day.
Nice. I haven't woken you up too early.
Oh, no. I do that nonetheless. I got kids. It doesn't matter anyways, so we're all good, man. This is perfect work time for me, so I should be on point and on fire today.
Awesome. So just to let a few people know, and even from myself as well, how did you get started with what you're doing today? When did it all begin?
Well, I grew up in the country, from the Northwest of the United States, and I played every little sport that you can imagine, as everyone did up here. And then I worked. So most of my kids that I grew up with were working on farms or had some sort of logging job or did something, and then went to high school and then played sports. So I kind of grew up with both of those, outdoors, working, and sports as a background. And I was really fortunate in that my parents were really supportive, though we didn't have a ton of means. They were emotionally supportive and loving and things like that. And they basically said, you guys can do whatever you want to my siblings and I, but you're just not doing what we did for a living. And so I worked for my dad for many years, building roads and doing stuff like that, manual labor. And it was enough to affirm that that's not what I wanted to do for my life. And so my brother and I were good at sports. We both went on to play college football. That would be the American football version over here. And so then I was like, okay, I'm here. This is not going to be my profession, certainly. So now what am I going to do for that job? Well, going to college was a big thing. Where I'm from, a lot of people don't go to college. And so like just going to college was a big deal. What are you going to do for that? I don't know. And so I just kind of thought, like, if I could do something in sports, since I love sports, that would be great. Back then, there wasn't really an academic field for these things. There weren't the professions like sports sciences like there are now. And so it was kind of just like meandering my way through. I love science. I love learning more about the body. And I was an okay athlete, but not great. And so I had real incentives to be like, look, if I work harder than these people and I do the things correctly, this will be the difference between me playing a lot or not playing. And so I was good enough to where I had that chance, but I wasn't so good that it didn't matter. And so going back to my working ethics, when I got to college, it was nothing for me to work harder than everybody because that's all I knew. That's just everyone I grew up with worked like that. I was stunned the kids that didn't work that hard. So I just needed to know what to do. And there weren't a lot of resources. The internet wasn't there. Literally, the internet didn't exist for the most part. I mean, it was around, but YouTube didn't even exist. And so I had to kind of scratch and claw and figure out, how do I do these things? And training for sports and nutrition and recovery and all that stuff for sport performance didn't exist as an academic field. So you couldn't, pull up and access these things. And certainly podcasts and whatnot were not around. So I just was like, initially, I want to just get better for myself, and then kind of realize I can make a career out of this somehow. But I didn't know exactly how. So I dabbled a little bit in sport coaching and realized I didn't want to be a sport coach. And then I went on and was an actual strength and conditioning coach for professional athletes for a little bit and realized that wasn't going to be it either. And so I decided maybe I'll just continue on my education. I don't know why, but the way I say it often is I was kind of poor anyways. So what's the big deal of staying in college and staying poor for a few more years? Like, who cares? I didn't know anything different anyways. So I just stayed in school, and I just kept thinking like more school is only going to delay this process and I don't have to face the real world, if you will. And so eventually, when I got done, I ended up in a spot where I had a pretty unique academic skill set as well as a pretty strong practical background. And I kind of was like, man, what if I just did these together? And bada bing, bada boom, that's ended up being my career. So that's really the backstory from childhood all the way up to finishing my PhD and starting my lab.
So do you spend more time now in the lab doing these peer-reviewed publications and presentations, or are you still doing the one-to-one coaching with athletes?
We do both. So I
Yeah.
actually now have recently transitioned from Southern California to move my lab. I'm the executive director of what's called the Human Performance Center in Dallas, Texas. And so that is a giant facility we have where I have teams of people where we can run a lot of research. So I don't have to be there in person day to day. Then I still have, in fact, as soon as we finish, I'm going to get on an airplane, head to Las Vegas for one of our UFC events at the Sphere. Actually, it's a big cool event. So I still coach people personally
Hmm.
directly. I have a large coaching company where I coach many clients, many through that.
Nice.
I coach just last night was the first night of Monday Night Football here in the States, and I coach Fred Warner, who's a linebacker of the 49ers. So I'm actively coaching. I'm actively running research studies. I wouldn't say I'm doing more of one than the other one, but it's a pretty good split, honestly. So I spend a lot of my day coaching, a lot of my day reading research and trying to publish and doing all kinds of factors associated with both.
I've always been curious to understand how the process of doing a peer-reviewed study or publication works. Is there something which you have in mind where you think about, I want to find out more about this particular topic. Let's go and run a study on it and do some tests with some athletes and see whether or not this hypothesis is true. How does it work?
Yeah, it can be that, man. Like it can be any number of things. Occasionally there'll be big what are called calls. So the military or a particular funding body will put out a call that says, "Hey, we're really interested in this area of research." And if you see that and you think that's interesting to me and I can do it, then you could apply and say, "Hey, give me those money, let me go do that study." So in that case, the
Mhm.
idea came from somebody else. Oftentimes, they're trying to solve a direct problem. For
Yeah.
example, I know that the Air Force is really interested in looking at how do you actually measure brain capacity after really bad sleep to determine whether or not we should then tell the pilots it's okay to fly today or it's not. Right. So
Uh,
in their case, they're trying to solve like a hyper specific problem. They put that call out to the world and say, whoever is the best at answering this question, you can have this money to run the study because we need to know that answer. Sometimes
okay.
it's my idea, like you said, man. Sometimes I watch somebody training or see something on YouTube or whatever. I just have my own idea that comes up with my coaching. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm onto something here. Or who knows? Sometimes it's another publication comes out. And I'm like, well, that was really interesting. But then what you really need to do is follow it up and answer this question or
Mhm.
something like that. So it could be any of those options that are help us develop our research question. And then from there you have to whittle it down and figure out what's the real question. You can only answer one question at a time with a study. And so you got to answer like, what's the one we have to do? And then you design your study backwards. So um, I'll give you one practical example right now. My current graduate student, Zoe, was really interested in doing something related to female physiology. So okay, great. And she was really into getting more information specifically around the menstrual cycle. So okay. So we started working our way through that. And so, what has been done? What hasn't been done? What do you think women in this cohort would like a direct answer to? And it took us 6 months of kind of reading all the studies that have been done. What kind of gaps do we feel like were there? And eventually she realized, wow, there's a lot of people that talk about sleep during the menstrual cycle, but there's really very little data on what's actually happening. And so we designed a really eloquent but very simple study. Well, we're going to answer the question of what exactly is happening throughout the menstrual cycle for each individual woman with sleep, and that it's stunning because you think that had been done like 50 times before, but that simple study has not been done. So in that particular case, it was just a matter of reading studies and research and figuring out where the gap was, whether or not we felt like that was a valuable thing to go answer. And of course, in that case, it was massively valuable. So then we go
Mhm.
out and put together the study. So it can come in many forms and fashions.
And then that's something which you can then share with the general public? Or is there some cases where you're actually not allowed to share your findings? For example, if
No,
the military was
the way
involved.
that that's never been the case in my lab. That
Okay.
can happen in the case of things like what we call industry funding. So say a equipment manufacturer or a nutraceutical company, a pharmaceutical company, a medical company, something like that comes in and says, "Hey, we want to pay you, Mike. Can you go do this?" It's not even really a study though. So you're going to look at it, but most academics wouldn't call that a study because you're not intending to publish it. You don't go through peer review. Those typically end up with what you call white papers. And so if
Mhm.
you look at many companies that sell things, if they say things like proven to do A, B, and C, and then you look and it's like oftentimes companies on the website will have a tab that says like read the science or something like that. Well, if you click on those, most of the time you're going to see those white papers. So that is something that a third party scientist did do. They were paid for, but it did not go through peer review. It was not published in that sense. So the companies will say it's published, it's those, but the scientists would never say that because it is not truly so. Sometimes they do, officially publish them, but most of the time that's more like paid consulting work, if you want to think about it like that, rather
Yeah.
than running a study. So some labs do operate like that, but mine has never. We've never once done that that I can
Do you
think.
ever find that
Anyways,
do you find that with some of the any recent studies you've done, have they ever conflicted with some which you've done in the past?
oh yeah. I mean, the one thing that I'll tell my students and I'll reiterate to them because a lot of times they're kind of worried about that, and my answer is actually, hey, number one, we don't care. The data are the data, and if that means that something we believe and hold true is wrong, then that is what science is. Number two, that's actually better because the reality of it is you can think about this two ways. One would be a little more um, sardonic, perhaps, but you'll probably get more attention for showing something is not true than it is true. So if you're looking to catch airwaves, like it's not the worst thing ever to come out and say, "Hey, this thing that we thought to be held true is actually wrong with better analysis." Now, I don't care about that, but it's not the worst thing. Number two, because I use and many of my friends use the information we collect in our labs in our personal practices. If I'm doing something wrong, it's actually in my best financial interest to figure it out as fast as possible. It is
Mm.
my personal interest to realize, like, oh, there's a better way to do this because I'm going to know that sooner than everybody else, and I am going to be less wrong. And so I reiterate to them, and it's hard for them to get to really conceptualize. But I'm like, man, if we don't ever fudge data, don't ever do anything, don't ever try to, because the truth from the data collection perspective is always what's most important, and that's getting the correct answer is all that matters in the most fair way. So yeah, happens plenty of times. We think things are going to work out one way, and they don't. You try your
I get
best to design your studies in a way that your ideas don't matter. Your opinion is irrelevant. You have to blind it. You have to make sure that the people that are analyzing the data, that design the study, are different people than collected the data. So there can be, as little potential chance of bias as possible. But yeah, that's always on the table. Always.
yeah. I guess that's one of the tricky things about being somebody who is going to be going on a massive platform such as yeah, Huberman's podcast. You did a series with him, which was unbelievable, by the way. But imagine if you weren't on top of a particular topic or study, and you said something that wasn't true, then people are going to go at you pretty hard for that. It's just one
Well,
of those things, isn't it?
but so here's the thing, like that actually happens.
Yeah.
There's no way you can be up to date perfectly on everything, even when this is my field. So that when people ask me, maybe said a little bit differently, are there other people that I think are really great in this field or anyone else's philosophies that I love? My answer is always, yeah, of course. But there's nobody, Andrew himself, not even myself, has not fudged something up on a podcast before. So there's sometimes you remembered something incorrectly. Sometimes you just didn't see a paper, and you didn't know that it was out there. So yeah, I mean, basically every podcast that I do, someone will come back and be like, no, and sometimes they're just, you know, being goofballs. But sometimes you're like, oh man, that's right. So not only, yeah, there's other people I support. Andrew's a great example. Sure. Do I believe and think he's correct in everything he's ever said? No. Does that mean he's not my friend anymore? No. Does that mean I stop listening to him? No. Because I don't even hold myself to that standard. You can't go back to everything I've ever said in a podcast with 100%. You'd be like, yes, that held up. That was true. That was accurate. So I don't even trust hold myself to that standard. I would never hold somebody else to that standard. So what you want to try to be is as correct as often as you possibly can. If you make a large mistake, of course, you want to remedy that as quickly as you can. But science changes, man. Data changes. So just because I said something 2 years ago or 6 years ago or 10 years ago for that matter, I can't promise you that it is always there. That's how we teach our graduate classes, actually. There's the joke that's in science. It's just a fake number, but we will often say, it was one of our very first lectures in our graduate courses, that 50% of the information I'm going to tell you is wrong, 50% is correct. Problem is, I don't know which 50 is which. So, like, we're going to do the best we can, but that is, you got to remember, science is a verb, not a noun. It is not a noun. It is a verb. It is an action. It is a process. It is not a static thing. So we do the best we can to be as accurate and fair as we can, but no one's going to be perfect.
When you're coaching people or training yourself, your athletes, to what extent do you make your decisions based off scientific data versus the experience that you've had in the field for over, decades?
Yeah, that's a
Is it
really
a combination
great question. Yeah, no, 100%. Sorry, we got a little bit of lag there, I think. It's obviously both, right? So the way that I think, actually, man, that's a really, really great question. The way that is best to approach this is science gives you the starting place. It is never the definitive answer. There's a term we use in this field called evidence-based. Evidence-based does not mean doing exactly what the peer-reviewed science says. Evidence-based has 3 prongs, and I think people forget these last 2. One prong of evidence-based is the peer-reviewed scientific publications. Another prong, though, that is still evidence-based is your personal experience. Your coaching background is still evidence-based. And number 3 is experts in the field. Now, you're going to run into problems if you pick one of these fields and only pay attention to it. In fact, you're not being evidence-based. If you're only reading the research and doing exactly what research says, that's not evidence-based. If you're only paying attention to what someone in the field is doing practically, that's not evidence-based either. So it's not a this or that. It has to be all of them. The best coaches I know are still paying attention to scientists, even though they've been coaching for 5, 10, 20, whatever the years, right? This is the highest level in all the sports are still paying attention to research. The same thing with good scientists. They're still paying attention to what's happening in the actual field of practitioners. So the way that you want to think about this to get the most success is science gives you the most likely to succeed for most people most of the time. That's all it says, right? So if you had a group of 100 random clients come in and you didn't know what to do, the research would say, hey, you're probably most likely to get the best results in the most of those 100 by doing X instead of Y. But once you get into X, from there with your 100 clients, you then need to know, you need to talk to practitioners that have had expertise. Have you ever worked with 100? I got 100 clients. That's this is their avatar. They're A, B, and C, and they want D. I got 100 of them. The evidence says start here, but what's been your experience? Okay, great. And then what does your own practical experience say, right? I think this person's going to do better over here. Okay, great. Then you actually collect data on them one way or the other. Maybe your data collection is simply their body weight or your eye, you're watching them move, or that's still data, right? So it isn't in a laboratory, but it's still data. And then you're coaching and making adjustments based on the data that are coming in. So it's just the starting place of what's the most likely to work most of the time in most people. But it is not normal to ever be the individualized prescriptive approach. This is exactly what to do with all of your clients, no matter what. That is not a proper interpretation of science.
Yeah. Has there ever been a scientific study that has conflicted with your experience when it's come to coaching someone?
Oh, thousands. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. I mean, just
So what do you do? What do you do
training.
in that situation?
Well, so here's the thing, right? It depends. You look at the study and you start to ask more questions. Okay, was this in the same population that I'm coaching? Right. So was the study done? For example, I coach professional athletes for the most part. Okay, great. So was the study done in professional athletes? No, probably not. Does that mean I throw it out? No, but I'm just planting a little flag. Okay, maybe context. Well, were the participants older? Were they younger? Okay, great. How long was it? It was 6 weeks? Maybe I want it to be long. What were they actually measuring? Maybe they're measuring muscle growth. But my athletes don't care that much about muscle growth. So I'm not going to throw it away, but I tend to deal with performance more. Okay. And so there's all these little flags. Again, you don't throw any of it out. You just you bank it, right? You're like, okay, great. And then you wait for the most part. That's my honest answer. I'm probably not taking a big action step from one study. I'm going to wait. Is the study replicated? Is it replicated in another lab from another scientific team? Okay, great. Did it hold up to different methodologies? What I mean by that is technical scientific stuff. So did they measure muscle growth correctly? Okay, maybe. If we start to see, I actually maybe the best example would be hypertrophy, muscle growth. When I was in school, it was a muscle hypertrophy repetition range was 8 to 12. That was it, right? You do 8 to 12 repetitions per set, and that's the optimal range to grow muscle. And then Brad Schoenfeld started coming out and saying, well, there's actually not a ton of evidence behind that. There's some, but there wasn't a ton. We started doing other things, and we started to realize actually one study had come out, and it was like, well, maybe up to sets of 20 are the same amount. Like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And then another study came out, and then another, and then another, and another. And all of a sudden, now there's dozens and dozens of studies that show the repetition range between 5 reps per set up to 30 reps per set, and probably more than 30 reps per set if taken to the same amount of failure and all other variables are controlled for, then you probably get the same amount of muscle growth. And so it was like, okay, it's been replicated multiple times in multiple populations, male, female, in different muscle groups, the quads, the biceps, the triceps groups. Oh, okay. Now I have enough confidence that's probably a real thing. And now I'll start adjusting my coaching practice. Now I'm not going to be so worried about making sure it's always 8 repetitions. And then evidence starts coming out saying, okay, well, why that's all the same for hypertrophy, it's probably not the same for strength. In fact, now it's pretty clear it's not the same for strength. So now I'm baking this as additional information saying, okay, great. So if my client wants pure strength, I'm not going to be doing exclusively or mostly sets of 10 to 20 repetitions. While I'll get equal muscle growth, I'm not going to get equal strength. Okay. At the same time, if my client wants, most amount of muscle mass, but doesn't care at all about strength, okay, now I have a different answer. At the same time, if my client wants a little bit of strength and a little bit of muscle growth, okay, now I have a different range of repetitions that I'll be able to pull my Rolodex from. So that's how you interpret things when they go against your thoughts, which was exactly my thought. 8 to 12 was the number, right? Then you wait for more research. You slowly start integrating it. You start practicing, seeing like, are you seeing the same thing in your clients that they saw in the study? Yes or no? But that's why it takes a little bit of time. It's not something that you should run and change your entire philosophy on because one paper was published. That's probably a little bit of a fool's errand. Be a little bit more stoic and patient. You can pay attention to it. You can start tinkering with it yourself. Or if you have kind of those long-term clients you've had around for a long time, you have coaches and staff, and you can start playing with stuff in-house before you then start deploying it to your paying customers.
Okay. I was curious to know a little more about the higher rep ranges because I'm familiar with that and what Brad has said about that topic. Is that specific to different muscle groups within the body, or was that study done on all muscle groups?
Really, another really great question. To date, that's been done on numerous muscle groups. That's for sure. One thing actually, though, that is pretty interesting that we don't have an answer to that I imagine will change pretty soon, because I know that there's some initial work coming on this, is that range actually totally true for each muscle group? Now, I just said a second ago, that general phenomenon, 5 to 30, has been demonstrated in multiple muscle groups. That said, maybe we need more data on this. Maybe the quadriceps really are best 8 to 15. I don't know, I'm making that up, right? But the soleus is actually 5 to 30. Or the gastroc, so now what I mentioned is two different muscles in the calf, right? So maybe the soleus responds better to higher repetition range because the soleus tends to be more slow twitch. Well, it is always more slow twitch. It's postural. The gastroc is the other one. It's the medial on the inside. It's the one that if you flex your foot up really towards your knee, that big muscle on the inside of your calf will pop up. That's way more fast switch. So maybe that responds better or equally, doesn't respond as equal to 25 to 30 repetition. That level of detail has not been teased out. And I actually imagine that if enough studies are done in that, you will see a difference between not only muscle group to muscle group, but probably within muscle to muscle. On average, that will matter. But I don't think we're to a place yet where we can say definitively, yes, train your slow twitch muscle fibers this way for optimal growth and your fast twitch muscles this way. But that's a possibility. We don't know.
Because that's something I've always had a debate with internally, particularly when it comes to doing exercises like any kind of a lateral raise or a rear delt fly. Because if I was to try and stick to the lower rep range, then I would realistically need to be lifting heavier weight. But I find that when I lift heavier weight when doing those movements, my ability to execute the exercise is poorer in quality because my trap takes over. So I find that, yes, I can still do the movement with heavier weight and fewer reps, but I notice that my trap is doing more of the work. So is it really more effective? Maybe if I was to lower the weight and do more reps, I would be able to maintain more of the tension on the delt, which realistically is going to give me better results. So there's all these little things that I'm thinking about and
this
trying
is
to decide
why,
what I should do.
Yeah, that's a great example of science has limits. So in the sense, in your example, maybe we learned that about the rear delts, do respond better to a higher weight, lower rep range. So maybe scientifically that is true. However, when it comes to you and your coaching, if you feel like that exercise can't be executed properly and it's not really actually challenging the rear delt, then it won't work. And so the science is, this is when you have to go from that gap from, okay, great. So theoretically, it should match up, but practically I can't actually execute it. We did a study years ago looking at the trap bar deadlift relative to the straight bar deadlift. And the question was kind of always, well, generally people will say a trap bar deadlift because your hands are set more posterior. Your hands are almost, directly below you, where on a traditional deadlift, the barbell is, of course, in front of your knees. So your hands are more forward. So because of that, generally with the barbell deadlift, if you're more leaned forward, okay, so your angle is more vertical, you have to lean forward to get it, where people tend to sit back more with a trap bar deadlift because their hands are backwards. So the question was, and people will say this all the time, what does muscle activation look like? Does a trap bar deadlift activate the quads more because you're standing more vertical? It's more like standing up, straight and down. The glutes less and the back less relative to the traditional deadlift, which should be more lower back, glutes and hamstrings and less quad. Well, here's the thing. When some of our participants did their trap bar deadlift, they maintained the exact same physical position that they had with their deadlift. And some of them didn't. Some of them sat way back more. So what do you think the data would show then? If you average those all together, it's going to say, oh, okay, there's no difference. Well, the reality of it is how you executed the technique determined everything. So is a rear fly, a reverse fly, going to activate your rear delt? Well, maybe it won't for you, because if you're shortening your shoulder to get it done, then it won't. And so the science, not that the science is wrong, it's you didn't actually challenge the muscle because your technique wasn't wrong, but maybe your anthropometrics, your joint angles, for you, that just didn't work, right? So maybe the trap bar deadlift does activate your quads more if you stay more vertical. But if you don't stay more vertical, it doesn't matter where you're grabbing. The implement is irrelevant. It's just a tool to get there. We've seen the same thing for pressing movements. So take something like a bench press or a back squat for that matter. And people will say certain things about the back squat does or doesn't activate this muscle or doesn't grow this muscle, or the bench press is good or isn't good for your chest. Well, the reality of it is that depends massively on the limb length of your shoulder to your elbow and your elbow to your hand. For some people, me personally, I get no chest development at all from the bench press. I get almost nothing. Okay. Other folks get a massive pump. If I do a hard bench press day, I will never be sore in my pec. My pecs will never be tired. I'll never get a pump in the middle of the session from it. And I get no development from it. So it's not a great chest exercise for me. But for most people, it probably is. It clearly is, right? So I have to go do other things. The same thing with the back, right? So pull-ups are a really suboptimal lat development technique for me. I just don't get much. I have to do. It all depends on your technique, your execution, your limb length. It has nothing to do with that. The squat is the same thing, and there's ample research to show that with the back squat now. For some people, the back squat is a wonderful tool for developing the glutes. Other people, it does almost nothing. So it's not a matter of, wow, this is real or this is unreal. It is absolutely real. The science is clear, but now you have to execute it a certain way. And if it doesn't, then you have to find a variation that does. That doesn't refute the science. It simply is now saying science can only answer some part of the question. You then have to use your experience and talent to fill in the gaps.
Yeah, it's almost like you would need every participant to have the same limb length, the same mobility, and also be doing everything else exactly the same. Especially intensity is always a funny thing, because when one person says that they train to failure, that's not the same as training to failure compared to somebody else. So when people always say, okay, when you're doing your repetitions, let's try and stick to 1 rep in reserve. But then that's so subjective to what is the definition of 1 rep in reserve. For different people, it means different things.
Totally. If you go to the average person, even myself, on an average training day, 1 rep in reserve, there was probably 2 more left, 3 more left, right? If I was in the right circumstances, if the music was loud enough, if people were around, if I had a mouthpiece in, there were 2 more.
Dorian Yates over your shoulder.
Totally. Right? Like this is no. We do the same thing. I work with competitive athletes in every sport. Think about this from the perspective of I'm leaving tomorrow, like I said, for the UFC. If I tell my UFC fighters to do not a lift per se, but even a lift, well, actually, lifting is great. If we take one of my fighters through a lift, I tell them, hey, RPE 9 out of 10. Do you know what that 9 out of 10 looks like? Because their framing 10 out of 10 was that 25-minute fight where I almost lost my life in my underwear in front of millions of people. So I'm like, I have to be really careful. And when they ask like how hard or whatever, I'm like, in that case, I'm going to go, give me 6 out of 10. And that 6 out of 10 will look like a 9 out of 10 for most people in the gym. It's not because they work harder or tougher, but they framed it against like 9 out of 10 to them means you're fighting for your literal life. It's like, oh, okay. So again, they're not tougher or anything like that. They are, but you know what I mean? It's just 10 is really, really far down that end, where like 6 or 7 is still like a brutally hard workout. So you have to really, really calibrate it. If I tell a Major League Baseball player 9 out of 10, for the most part, like I'm not worried. They're going to go 9 out of 10. Yeah. Oh, okay. So it's again, they're not like they're less tough and they don't work as hard, but they've never been there. So yeah, you're 100% right. A very well-trained lifter who's 10 to 15 plus years into training still feels really good, is injury-free, is still competing. That's going to be different than the person who's 6 months in, for sure. That's also different than the 22-year-old. The 22-year-old who just recovers from everything. It's a way different conversation than the 35-year-old who's like, okay, I've been doing this a long time, but I also know when like, I probably shouldn't push for 1 more here. There's going to be real risk associated, so I'm pulling back. If you look at our weightlifters that just got done in Paris in America, we did pretty good at Olympic weightlifting wise. Or you look at some of the classic powerlifters, there's levels to 9 out of 10. Right? There's levels to 10 out of 10s that are quite different. It also matters on functional size, right? So if you're a heavyweight and you're gonna take 900 pounds back squat, you're gonna go after 450 kilos. Like something like this in a really big back squat. That's not the same. If you call that 9 out of 10, it's not the same as somebody doing a 9 out of 10 with 100 kilos. It's just not, right? Because that load matters so much more. So yes, man, 9 out of 10, reps in reserve, 9 out of 9s, it's not the same across the board. You will never see people who are that strong who can train at 1 rep in reserve like someone who's even as equally trained, but just as moving half the amount of load. That load starts to matter at some point.
With these strength athletes that were competing in Paris, do you find that they have superior genetics that allows them to perform, at their very best, being the top in the world, or is it something that they've just dedicated their lives to and become very good at? Because I get a
It's
question
obviously
a lot of the
both.
times. I get a question a lot of the time when it comes to genetics, and is there a possibility to out train less than ideal genetics?
Okay, so that's a little bit of your question. Maybe I'll say it this way. You think it's true that somebody who has the worst genetic draw in the world can ever beat somebody in a major sport that has the best genetic draw in the world? It's an obvious no, right?
Hmm.
No matter what, you and I could never, the easiest one, right? You and I could never beat Tiger Woods in golf. Not going to happen, right? You and I could never beat Eddie Hall in a deadlift competition. Not going to happen. I don't even know how much you deadlift, but if you deadlift 700 pounds, you still have no chance to beat Eddie Hall, right?
No, no.
There's no way, right? Okay, so we know that that's true. Genetics are clearly part of it. Let's go the inverse. We also then saying whoever has the best genetic draw, training is irrelevant. Clearly not. Clearly not, right? I promise if you train really, really hard and Eddie Hall never lifted a weight, you would probably have beaten him. So in both scenarios, I probably wouldn't have because he's 3 times my size. I don't know how big you are, but so you get the point, right? So the question is,
Yeah.
yes, sometimes genetics are irrelevant. Sometimes they're everything. Where does it lie in the middle? Okay, take a look at just because you mentioned it, look at our females in American weightlifting. We had a couple of things happen this year. One, we had some major success. Olivia Reeves crushed it. I think Olivia Reeves is like 21 years old. Right? You typically are not peaking in a strength sport at 21 or 22. But before Olivia, we had Kate Nye. Kate Nye won worlds of silver, also at like 22, same weight class. And then a couple years before that, we had Maddie Rogers. So what you have are these girls that are coming up and they're smashing, and they're breaking records, American records. They're breaking youth records and stuff, and then they're having success in their 20s, 20, 21, 22. One is going to basically say that's, and then why I'm saying that is those girls were not in developmental programs. They weren't weightlifting since the time they were 4. They were in gymnastics and things like that. And within a few years of being in a strength sport, a power sport, they were top of the world. Olivia specifically is, Olympic champion, world record holder. So you're like, okay, but they all train for years nonstop. They don't take breaks. Olivia, Maddie, and all them Kate lifted for hours a day, almost every day, 6 days a week, multiple sessions a day for years. None of those 3 girls would have ever won a world medal had they not trained like absolute crazy. So it is all of that. You do have, if you stack again, Kate versus Olivia, Kate won a world championship basically within a couple of years. And then had 4 or 5 years of training behind her. And Olivia, with a year or 2 of training, come and then beat her. So it's both. Like they have tons and tons of training and they work really, really hard. And then sometimes someone with better genetics just shows up. And you did put the work in and you had Kate had genetics, again, to win a world title a couple of years into training. And then someone showed up with a little bit better genetics. And there's just nothing you can do. So it's all of those. And having worked with world champions and such in probably 15 plus sports right now at this point in my career, I can tell you I've seen them all. I've coached some people where they just do not work hard at all. They don't hardly do anything. And they're still all pros or MVPs or on the border or biggest contract in their sports. And then I've had the opposites. People were like, you're actually like only kind of good and you've worked really, really hard, and you're not famous, but you were in Major League Baseball for 6 years. And for you, for your genetics, that was incredible. And you got there, or you made the team for 1 year, which was unbelievable because you did everything correctly because your genetics were not great. So it is clearly a part of it. And you can see examples from many, many sports where people do come in and break world records and win world championships really, really early. And that is mostly a genetic draw. It doesn't guarantee success either, man.
I have a question for you guys. Do you take supplements? And if you do you really know what supplements you should be taking? You see, this is a problem I had for years. I would walk into a supplement store, I would buy loads of random bottles of supplements and just pop pills every day, hoping for the best. But in reality, I had no idea whether or not I should be consuming these supplements. That is where Bionic came into the picture and solved that problem. You see, I've been working with Bionic for the past couple of years, and since 2021, I've been getting my blood work done with them every 3 to 4 months. And based on that blood work, they send it off to get analyzed, and then they put together a very specific customized formula for me, which will last me for 3 to 4 months until I get my next blood work done. And honestly, it's been an absolute game changer for me. They also offer another product called Bionic Go, where all you need to do is go onto the website, fill in questionnaire, and then based on that questionnaire, they can give you your customized supplements. So if that sounds like something that would be of interest, which I highly recommend, go onto the website, bionic.com, and you can use the link in my description to get a nice little discount on your first order. I've got a question for you, which is just some advice I want to get from you based on my goals and my training. So I'm very shallow in the sense that I don't really care a huge amount about performance. Of course, I want to lift heavy, I want to progressively overload, but I train for aesthetics. It's like purely for looks. So the large majority of my training consists of resistance training. There is very minimal cardio. In fact, all the cardio that I do is basically just steps. It's walking. That's all I need to do in order to maintain the body fat percentage that I want to stay at. However, I'm getting a little bit older now. I'm 34. Ever since I got into my 30s, I've become more conscious about my health, well-being, longevity, and so on. And I want to obviously look after my heart. So I don't really do a huge amount of endurance training or cardiovascular training to maximize my fitness and to train my heart. So what form of cardio would you recommend for somebody like me that would allow me to improve my fitness and conditioning without interfering with the process of maximizing muscle hypertrophy?
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you look at the old Joe Weir line, I think it was Joe, he famously said, show me one person who wants to get really strong, and I'll show you 10 who just want to look strong. So the fact that you're out there training for physique, man, like you are the norm rather than not the norm. So all of us want to look great. Even our performance athletes, they want to look good too. So the aesthetics is, the way I'm saying that is like you kind of said it almost a little bit sheepishly, and I don't think you should. I don't think there's any embarrassment or problem with saying like, I want to just look as great as possible. I'm not going to hurt myself and compromise my health that much, but my primary goal is to look fantastic. I think that's a great goal. I love it, right? So kudos to you for that. Still takes a shit ton of dedication, like arguably more dedication than it takes to be strong and athletic, because you got to have everything on point to look great. Yeah. So it's very, very disciplined work. Your sleep, your training, your nutrition, or if you're strong, you got to train hard, but you can kind of eat whatever you want. You can do other things. So physique stuff is very disciplined thing. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. In terms of your cardio, if you're 34, you do get cardiovascular benefits from the style of training that you would do. I don't know exactly how you train, but if you were to be doing only strength stuff, the repetition range is so low that there's really very little caloric expenditure and very little cardiovascular challenge. However, if you're doing stuff where you're at a higher repetition range, probably circuits and drop sets and pyramids and things like that, you're getting a pretty big cardiovascular challenge. You're getting quite a large blood pressure challenge. There's actually a lot of research on very specifically even isometrics for blood pressure. So you're taking people who are not lifters that have high blood pressure, hypertension, you have them do isometrics or strength training in general, and many times you'll see a reduction in systolic and diastolic blood pressure. So that is actually very big cardiovascular benefits. So I would imagine your blood pressure and things like that are probably okay. Your VO2 max is probably not enormous, but do you know your resting heart rate?
I think it's around 60 something. I mean,
Okay,
I've got
so it's a little
the loop,
high
but yeah.
for where you should be. Should be lower than that. You should be certainly in the 50s, if not a little bit lower. So maybe there is some cardiovascular gains that need to be made. But oftentimes, people that, and I don't know how you train at all, but based on your physique and what I've seen on Instagram and stuff, you probably train pretty hard. So
Mhm.
you're probably not in a terrible spot. I'm saying that to say, if you wanted to keep doing what you're doing at 34 years old, I think you're okay. Now, if you were
But if there
40,
was if there was one style of cardio that you'd incorporate, because I'm challenging myself once a week. Let's do some form of high intensity cardiovascular work for many reasons. Obviously for the health reasons, but also just to make myself do something that I don't want to do. Just do something
yeah,
hard.
you could probably get away with a couple of options. Walking is a great thing to do if you're doing a lot of steps. Just get your physical
Mm,
activity in. That's for someone like you, that's not going to do much to your VO2 max. If you wanted to step up and do more of a lower intensity thing, this is on a bike probably for you, or on a rower, or swimming, whatever your jam is. This is not walking. This is a little bit higher than that. That would probably behoove you as well. That's not going to take out much. If you're in a caloric deficit, that might hurt a little bit. But energy reserves, recoverability is not going to take that much out of you.
mhm.
If you want to go the opposite end of the direction and just do short bouts of really high intensity intervals, you can do that, but now we have to really be paying attention to your autonomic nervous system. The reason I'm saying that is there's only so much high intensity that you can take when you're managing calories. And I don't know what you're doing with calories right now, if you're going down or going up, or if you're just at maintenance. But I would want to be careful of that. Your resting heart rate's not great. I'd want to check some other metrics on you and to see, like, okay, by dosing this much high intensity, are we getting a lot of bang for our buck in terms of time? Sure. Are we digging a pretty big hole though in recovery? Sometimes no, sometimes it's okay, but sometimes it actually is. So, uh, honestly, we have to tinker. We'd have to have some more metrics, and you'd have to tinker. Where are you getting the better response from? Kind of a longer, extended, not walking, but a truer cardio. This could be elliptical, could be something low impact, but you're going to have to pick up the pace more than walking, and you maybe do that a couple of times per week. Or we try to go more efficient, and you do whatever smaller intervals that you want. Both of them are well documented to improve cardiovascular fitness. Very well documented. And it's not just a time issue here. It is now, what do we do into recovery stores? I don't know what your training looks like either. So we have to figure out kind of what days we're doing it on, when it blends.
Mhm.
So either one of them could be good options, but just really pay attention to what's happening to total recovery, what's happening to resting heart rate, what's happening to your sleep, what's happening to your respiratory rate, your HRV, and things like that, to make sure that it's not taking too much out of your training. So I could see either option playing.
What's your thoughts on these sleep trackers, things like the Aura Ring, Whoop, Apple Watch, things like that? Because they're becoming increasingly more popular, but they're really trying to figure everything out based on only your heart rate. So it's not taking into account your brain waves or the eye movement. So in reality, how accurate are they?
Really nice question. The answer to these technology questions will always be, it depends on what question you're asking. Here's the reality. I have right now probably 6 athletes that I coach that are on over $200 million contracts. Do you really think I'm going to use a $200 Apple Watch?
Yeah.
We just had the Olympics. We have 4 years. We got one shot. And you think I'm going to use a $300 ring? Certainly not. So if
Yeah.
you're asking me, is that the best possible state of the art? No, 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 no,
Mm.
no. Not even close. Okay. My company, in conflict of interest here, is called Absolute Rest. We do all that stuff you mentioned. So your environment's gonna be scanned. It is brainwaves that are scanning, ocular metrics, eye tracking, breath tracking, salivary, blood, all that stuff just for sleep, right? And much, 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 much more. So if you want to know state of the art, best in class, if we need to know your recovery, we're not using a tracker like that at all, ever. That said, I also still coach people for free. And I have some amateur like things because I just honestly I love coaching people that really need help, right? So maybe all we have is $300, we can use those technologies. What can we use them for? Okay, great. It doesn't matter if it's Garmin or Polar or Morpheus or pick your little technologies. They're $200 to $400. Okay, many of them are pretty okay at whether or not you're sleeping. And so if you're looking at it from just like total time, you might be okay. They're not very good about knowing when you're awake at night. They can't diagnose anything about how you're sleeping. The sleep metrics, your sleep staging, how much time you're spending in deep or REM, throw all that out. Don't look at it at all. It's almost entirely useless. HRV and respiratory rate they're okay. Again, they're not great. They're not done well, but they're at least somewhat reliable. So if you have consistent data on them and you notice a big change, it's probably real. Now you got to be careful because every 6 months or so, those companies change their algorithms and your scores will completely change. So if you do wake up one day and you're like, nothing happened, and all of a sudden I'm getting an hour more of deep sleep, it's probably not you. It's probably they changed their algorithms, right? Which is one of the many reasons why you don't want to trust these things. But a lot of times they're good at notifying users. You'll get emails, you'll get things like that. Hey, we changed our stuff. That's sometimes independent of the company, not always. Okay, so it's good for accountability. If you're coaching somebody and you're trying to go like, yo, Mike, you're supposed to go to bed at 11. They're like, yeah, Mike, you're like, yeah. Andy, I was asleep at 11. I'm like, I'm looking at your tracker. You were up till playing Fortnite till 1. I don't care if the data are accurate or not. We know that you were up playing whatever. Okay, so you're being tracked. I'm watching you as your coach. You're going to make better choices. People tend to make better health choices when they know they're being watched, for better or worse, right? So there's many, many, many ways. They are oftentimes great for conversation starters. So as the coach, for example, that maybe the HRV score is not super accurate, but this person's fried out. You know that they're stressed out. You know that they're not taking their recovery seriously. Maybe they're eating Doritos every night. They're really erratic, whatever. And you're just looking for an entry point for conversation. Maybe you can look and say, hey, look, Mike, I keep telling you got to relax and recover. But it's not me. It's the objective. Look at your data. This is your HRV score. Now, here's some research on the negative side effects for your goal. Let me make one up because I did this one last week. Erectile dysfunction. So I'm not getting the type of erections I used to get. It's sometimes I'm having a hard time. I get an erection, but then it goes away, or it's just not as firm as I like. Something like that. Okay, great. And then you look and somebody's HRV on an Oura ring is average of 15 milliseconds, and they're a 34-year-old. Like, okay, great. Well, now you can pull up studies, and there's lots of them. There's strong associations between low HRV scores and erectile dysfunction in middle-aged men. And so, okay, who cares? Maybe the thing is off. Maybe the Oura ring said your HRV was 20 milliseconds. In reality, it's not that. It is 40. Who cares? It's still really bad. It's still really low. And this goes, okay, Mike, so you've been complaining about A, B, and C, and you want to go on testosterone cream to fix it. Reality of it is, this is why I keep telling you you're stressed. HRV is this, ABC. Here's the data behind it. This is why I'm saying we should do this program. So for those things like that, these technologies are affordable, they're accessible, and they can be really strong entry points to conversations like that. So those are really exceptional ways to do it. I always like to make sure we do that because a lot of times I just default to get kind of into best in class because that's what we do with most of the time with even our non-athletes, all of our executive clients, all of our normal people clients, they get everything best in class. But a lot of people can still get a tremendous amount of success from those more accessible, more affordable technologies, as long as you're just using them appropriately. So understand the pros and cons, and then use them the way that you can get the most out of them, and don't fall into the recovery scores. Don't take the training advice from them. Don't pay attention to the weird metrics that are on there. Your sleep number, your sleep score, like that's the stuff to stay away from. Who cares? Just go to the actual individual metrics.
I can imagine with all the high-tech devices that you have, you would probably look at these and just laugh. So
Oh yeah.
I can imagine you probably are not wearing any of them.
No. Well, I mean, we can at this point, we can run a full FDA, which is like the governing body in America, FDA approved clinical sleep study from people every night from their fingertip. We can medically and clinically diagnose sleep disorders. You never have to go to a sleep hospital ever again. It's the same technology. In fact, it's better. We've got at this point over 100 peer-reviewed publications on that technology. And so when it's like, okay, you're gonna wear your tracker, or you're gonna like go get a sleep study done, like you're a couple decades behind. Like that's not the way to go about it when we can do things like this. That said, my company, my coaching company, Rapid Health and Performance, I don't know, we've bought hundreds, if not thousands. We've bought certainly thousands of Oura rings at this point. We still do. Every one of our clients, for the most part, gets an Oura ring. So there are certain things we can get from that, and there's many other reasons for it. So I'm not anti any of those companies. I have a great relationship with Oura. I don't have any financial ties to them or any reasons. And it's not about Oura, but you mentioned it. But yeah, you can get things from them that you can't get from other places, or there's many possible avenues for them. So our philosophy is always we want to use the tool that's going to get us the most success. And I don't care where that tool comes from, my company, somebody else's companies, whatever the case may be. Ultimately, you got to put your client in the best position possible to succeed, and that's ultimately what we're going to do.
Yeah, I think from my experience of wearing a Whoop band for a couple of years now, I take it with a pinch of salt. I definitely wake up sometimes, look at it, I'm like, that's not right, because it's either told me I've had a great sleep and I feel like shit, or I've had a bad sleep and it's said, oh yeah, you had an amazing sleep. Like I take it with a pinch of salt, but one thing, it holds me accountable sometimes. Like for sure, it makes me want to try to go to bed a little bit earlier, and I can see just how much alcohol interferes with a good night's sleep. So,
well, you want to hear a funny story
experience
about
of?
I could sorry to cut you off, but I could tell this story because he directly gave me permission. So I coach a golfer named John Rahm. He's number 1, 2, 3 in the world, kind of depending on the day. He was actually in I don't remember if it was Abu Dhabi or Dubai. I'm pretty sure it was one of the two. Dubai, I think they had a tournament out there. So he wears an Oura ring, and he stopped wearing it, and because he was like, dude, I was in Dubai, and John takes his health and performance incredibly serious. He's very, very disciplined. He doesn't mess around. He'll drink occasionally, but it's usually like a drink at a sponsor event or something like that. Months and months go by without a single touch of alcohol for him, especially in season, blah, blah, blah. I got to give that caveat because I don't want this to come out the wrong way. People are like, oh, geez, John drinks a ton. But he was in Dubai, and they had he had his private jet back here to the States. And he's like, man, I flew from Dubai. We changed time zones. He didn't do any of the stuff that we normally do, because we have a whole protocols we do, and we're changing time zones and jet lag and everything to do. He's like, I didn't do any of it. We were just having a good time. He's like, I drank a whole bottle of wine. Again, more than one drink is very rare for John. Very rare. I drank a whole bottle of wine. I got back. I woke up the next day. I felt like death, and my sleep score in the Oura was like 100. And he's like, what? And I was like, yeah. He's like, no way. So he's like, I can't. So he took it off, and he's gone a couple of months without wearing it. And he's like, man, my restoration feels so much better now that I'm not checking anymore. Yeah. So I want the data. So the rule that I stole this from Matt Walker. Matt's a friend of mine, and he was like, dude, make them wear it, but then don't let them. There's a function on Oura that you can go in and you can block your client from seeing their data. So what we do is that it's like, you are going to collect it. You don't get to see it, but I want to keep watching it because I want the accountability and other stuff that we're watching, especially if we're tweaking something. But you don't have to see it. And so for him, it's best when he doesn't see his stuff. And again, he texted me all that and was like, and please talk about this on your podcast. I was like, okay. All right. Man.
That's a good way to look at it. For them not to get too involved with the data. Do you have a general approach to alcohol and the athletes that you train? Like, do you tell them to stay away from it completely, or do you say, okay, well, if you are going to drink, this is what you should drink in this amount, or did you
Look,
say stay
this
away?
one's honestly pretty easy. We have dealt with people that just don't touch alcohol, period. I don't have to say
Yeah.
anything. They've made that choice, or they don't like it, or whatever the case is. And then I won't name them, but I have many professional athletes that are very legitimate alcoholics. You're talking 7, 8, 10 drinks every night. We have had plenty of CEOs and business folks and things that are same thing. And they'll come in, they'll directly tell us, I'm not changing my alcohol, so save your breath. Okay. You know the answer here. Any amount of alcohol is not good. But at the same time, I drink alcohol, right? Like
Mm.
some. So you what I tell the clients is, hey, look, you have to make your choice. You know, any amount of alcohol is taking possible gains off the table. How successful do you want to be? So you want to get the best success possible, then it's functionally zero alcohol is there. But the reality is you have 1 or 2 drinks per week. That's probably not changing that many people's
Yeah.
performance, right? It's probably not that big of a deal for most people. So those are kind of the numbers we stick to. I'm like, hey man, like 1 or 2 a week, like I can probably live with. I will go months without touching alcohol, not on purpose, but just like it's not a part of my routine or normal at all for me. So I'll just go weeks without. It's like, oh yeah, crap. Then I won't hesitate. I will guarantee you, I will be drinking some alcohol this weekend. It is a very long process to get to a UFC fight. We're at the Sphere in Vegas, this big crazy thing, and I will probably have a beer at, at the fights or something like that. Like that's going to happen. Um, so
Yeah.
I wouldn't stop myself if I wanted to either. Like I'm not going to put a limit. I don't have a, hey, drink vodka and don't drink beer, whatever, wine, red, white. I don't care, because the honest reality of it is the problem with alcohol is in the dosage. So if you're only drinking 1 or 2 drinks a couple of times per month, it doesn't matter what type of alcohol it is. It's irrelevant. Ethanol is still
Yeah.
ethanol. Dude, you can't change it. The other stuff in the drink is there. But even if you're like, dude, I like the strawberry daiquiri. I like double sugar and honey. Okay, great. Like I'm gonna feel terrible on that. But I don't care about the 50 grams of sugar, because it shouldn't be happening more than once or twice a month anyways. So like who cares? That's not really
Yeah.
gonna play that big of a deal. Like it'll make you feel terrible probably, but I'm not worried about that. If it's something you're doing really frequently, then we might have to start picking kind of like what's a little bit better. But the problem is not the 10 grams of sugar in the drink. The problem is you shouldn't be drinking that much alcohol anyway. So then, like, I generally don't like playing a game of how can I make something that's terrible a little bit less shitty. Like, what are we trying to do here? Like, go to somebody else. That's not what I do.
Yeah.
Do something that's great for you. So one philosophy we use all the time is I will never answer the question of, hey, what's a little bit less crappy? My answer is always, is that the best thing you could be possibly doing right now? No. So then you're an adult, make your choice. Unless you're making if your question to me is what's the best thing I could possibly be doing right now, I'll answer that question. But if your question is like, I'm doing something bad and like, can I be a little bit less? No, you're an adult.
Yeah.
Like, you want to eat cereal, eat
It's
cereal. I don't care. But like, I'm not going to like be like Frosted Flakes are better than Cheerios. Like, I don't care. You're eating cereal. Like, which is whatever. 99, you get the point, right? It's like,
Yeah.
you want
I
to eat
remember
cupcakes,
when
I don't care.
I used to coach people back in the day, and they'd like to go out, they'd like to party, they'd like to drink, and they would complain about not seeing the results as fast as they'd want. And I would say to them, well, you know what it is you have to do. Just fucking stop the drinking. You don't have to stop drinking forever, but for this period of time when you're working with me, let's just cut it out and focus on making the most progress that you can make. And then when you've hit that goal, then okay, do whatever you want.
Yeah. Or tone it down. So go out, instead of having 10, have 5 or 4 or 6. I don't care. Like, 10's not going to go well.
Yeah.
So do your 10 or do whatever. Like, this is not a coaching thing to do. This is a you decision.
What's your thoughts on the sort of the recent hype around biohacking and longevity? Do you into any of that, or do you think it's just all nonsense?
Yeah, I mean, it's just we're playing a game of semantics a little bit here, right? Because it's like, all right, well, what's biohacking? Um, do you consider going outside in the morning biohacking? Some people do. Some people like sell biohacking, and they're going to tell you to go outside. I'm like, really? That's biohacking? Going outside? Like,
Mhm.
so I guess we're biohacking. Drink water, eat real food. Like, okay, great. Like creatine sometimes is biohacking. Like, so I don't know the line between biohacking and like normal human practices. That's a pretty good thing to do. If you're asking if we do things that have no scientific evidence that are high on technology, no, generally not. But do we use technology? Yeah, for sure. Like there's lots of tools we can use if we have a rationale for them, if we have a reason, if we're seeing benefits to them. In terms of longevity stuff, I don't think it's functionally that interesting of a term because the reality of it is we coach people from 18 to 88. Like we've had really old people in our program. Everybody wants to look the best that they can. That means something different for everybody. You want to look a certain way, you value something, other people don't want to be big and bulky, fine, whatever. But you want to look a certain way. You want to feel a certain way, and you want to perform a certain way. So whether you want to use that look, feel, and perform to age as long as possible, great. Or you want to use that to just be a better parent, be a better leader, make decisions faster, have a better word recall to run your company faster as a 44-year-old, I don't really care. But I have to optimize this same thing for everybody. You need to think clearly and quickly. You have to be in good cardiovascular health. Your endocrine system has to be great. We have to have a high immune system. You have to be able to not be in pain. Like it's the same thing. It's literally the same thing. If I optimize an 88-year-old to win the 88-year-old Olympics as well as to win the spelling bee, I've just hacked longevity. It's the same
Yeah.
damn thing, right? Like so, it doesn't mean anything to me at all. I always call it perform. You want to perform at your best. You're not going to live very long if you're not performing well. By the same token, if you're performing well, you're going to live longer. The only subtle difference here is at the end of physical performance. So if you're trying to break a world record in back squats, that's probably not going to behoove your long-term longevity, right? If you're trying to optimize everything to win an NBA championship, there's probably going to come at the cost of some physical, maybe joint health or something like that. But you're talking the fringe. This is a very rare case. Most people just want to have the best physique they can, to not be in pain, to do the activities that they want to do, to have great energy, great recovery, great digestion, great mental clarity and focus and happiness. Did I just describe an athlete or longevity?
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
So like that's what I'm going after in all cases.
Is there anything outside of sleep, nutrition, low stress, and rest that will increase the rate of recovery in between training sessions?
Yeah. So think about this as an umbrella. What we're talking about here when we say recovery is allostatic load. That's the science word to say all stressors go into the same bucket, if you will. So you mentioned a bunch of them. The way that we break stressors down is what we call visible stressors and hidden stressors. Now, visible stressors are many of the ones that you mentioned. They're visible. You see them, you feel them, you know that they're there. You know you're drinking alcohol. You know you're unhappy. You know that you're not moving and exercising. You know you're in pain. You know you didn't sleep last night. You know you ate a pizza and ice cream, etc. All that's true. That's got to all be dialed in, right? Why? Because adaptations are a response to stressors. The more stress you can put in the system, the more adaptation you get. But that allostatic load is only so big. And so if your stress bucket is already preloaded with non-specific stressors, then you don't have very much room to add the specific stressors in, right? Now, if that bucket is really low and I can add double the amount of stressors, call the stressor training, workouts. Now I can get more adaptation without overfilling my bucket. And so our goal is always to make sure you have the highest percentage of your allostatic load coming from specific stressors. And so we want to reduce them at all costs, for the most part, from non-specific ones. Now, again, the non-specific ones can be visible or hidden. You mentioned the visible ones. Yes, clean house there. There's actually hundreds of millions of people that have undiagnosed, even subclinical sleep disorders. So it's things like that. You think you sleep well, and we've been through this thing many, many times. People think they sleep well. You actually test them, and they have an actual sleep disorder. Okay, so clean house on all those things. But let's get past all that. You're hydrating. You feel a sense of connection and purpose, physiology to psychology, up and down. And then you have the hidden stressors. Now, these only really come with advanced testing because you don't see them, you don't feel them. This could be a micronutrient deficiency or excess. This could be a heavy metal. This could be some subcompromised immune system or endocrinological issue. Something is off there. We don't necessarily even feel it. You certainly wouldn't be able to pinpoint it. You may feel off, but you don't know why. Many of these things are going to answer that question. Those are still adding stress to your system, but you don't necessarily know why. So you're not getting the adaptation. You think you're a non-responder or something like that, when the reality is you had a bunch of non-specific stress filling that bucket. We go in and we drain that thing, and now all of a sudden you're able to get way more recovery, or you don't need the recovery because your endogenous systems are actually better because they don't have as much to recover from. You felt like it was your training, but the reality is it was all these other stressors that are really dragging your system down that are there. The easiest example here is people love to talk about testosterone. Okay, great. Your testosterone is low. Your testosterone is low. Okay, fine. Why is it low? You got to answer that question. And once we do that, you'd be surprised how many things we remove from the system, and then testosterone just really starts going up, and now you didn't have to do anything else. And now all of a sudden, of course, recovery and adaptation start to go up. But it's almost always compromised for a reason. We find that reason, we remove that reason, and now just let the body do what it does. And we almost get out of the way a little bit and let physiology run the show.
Yeah. So I guess one of the main reasons when people struggle when it comes to pushing past the plateau is because they're dealing with too much stress in their life. And if they actually minimize that in different areas, then they can continue to make progress in the gym and, in theory, perform better and lift heavier.
Yeah.
But yeah, continue.
But I just want to make sure when you say that, because you're right, people often hear that as psychological stress. So yes, like stress can be psychological stress, but we've had so many people who are like, I'm not stressed at all. And like mental health evaluations, they work with our mental health specialists and teams, and they're 10 out of 10. They're fine. But that's not the only form of stress. That is a huge form of stress, but there are lots of other forms of stress. And the great example is this. So you do that. And this happened last week as well, or 2 weeks ago. Okay, great. We take a look at all those things, and all those scores seem to be fantastic. CO2 tolerance is great. We're not seeing any issues. There's no complaining, no stress, no struggling, falling asleep, no waking up in the middle of the night, not having a hard time turning your brain off. You're not hyperreactive emotionally. All things seems to be great. And then we start looking at things like DHEA and sodium potassium ratios. And we start looking at a handful of other metrics in your blood. And we combine that with HRV. We look at respiratory rate. And we're like, oh, this is a very stressed physiology. Psychologically, what tends to happen is one of two things. Either you learn to tune it out. That's the new normal. So it doesn't have a psychological effect on you. Or you're completely untuned with your body. You don't know what you're feeling at all. So you're like, I feel fine. So it's actually a good thing because it's not putting a psychological stressor on you, but you are getting the screaming signals. So we can see that objectively, in this case, in blood. Every telltale sign of not just acute, but chronic stress load as well. We have a number of metrics we can look at for non-functional overreaching, getting into training. So we've probably got 20 or more metrics, molecular biomarkers we can look at. And in that case, in this particular client, non-athlete client, he was clearly very physiologically stressed. So we were like, cool. And we made this exact point. You are not psychologically stressed. However, your body is giving us all the signals that it is physiologically stressed. We have to bring that stress load down. Did that, and then boom, took off like a rocket ship. So yeah, Mike, you're 100% correct, but I just wanted people to make sure that they didn't hear that and think, I'm not psychologically stressed, so that's not me. It must be something else. It's not just psychologically. It could be physiological stress as well. That could be causing that whole problem.
So for somebody who has, in theory, got everything on point when it comes to their sleep, their nutrition, their recovery, minimizing stress, they go into the gym, they're following a training program. Obviously, the goal is to progressively overload week on week. But at some point, it will eventually get to the stage where, okay, it's getting pretty difficult now to keep consistently lifting heavier. So at that stage, what should they do? There's obviously they could potentially rest a little bit longer in between sets. They could maybe change the time of the day when they train. What else would you say? Or is it really just a case of, okay, we need to change the training programming?
Okay. Another excellent question, man. This is fun. Okay, handful of things. What you want to do is triage, and you want to start with the most obvious ones. Okay, and then work your way down to complex later. But yeah, you could try that. Maybe make one subtle change in your training. Maybe you need to tone things down. Maybe you need to pick things up. Maybe you just need to be patient. A good rule of thumb is if you haven't seen a change in 6 weeks and you're that client you just described, that doesn't mean anything to me. The level of progress people make at that level of physique, that level of strength, is months typically for very small changes. So if you're like, man, I haven't made any progress in a month and all that stuff is going on, I'm probably like, that doesn't mean shit. We don't need to change anything. We have nothing to do there. So number one, be patient. I actually did an entire podcast on peaking and tapering and breaking through plateaus. So on my show, Perform, I had a whole episode dedicated to this, and I run through an entire script to do. So you can check that out, but I'll give you the quick version. Number one, be patient. Make sure this is a real thing and not just there. Number two, start taking more diligent notes. I had a really classic example many years ago. We had a powerlifter going through this, and it was just like, okay, what are we missing? What are we forgetting? And it was probably maybe even 6-8 months of kind of peaking, and then went back, found old training logs. Was like, man, I used to do really high dumbbell rows, sets of 50 for a powerlifter, right? He was like, man, I haven't done those in years. So went back to him, immediately deadlift went up. By immediately, it was probably 3 or 4 weeks. Started doing his heavy dumbbell rows at the end of one of his sessions, and boom, just went right back up. So if you don't have those, he had diligent notes for years. If you don't have those diligent notes, you have nothing to reference back on. So start taking diligent notes on everything. And if you have data to go back on, take a look at that. What are you forgetting? What are what's a weak link you haven't been thinking about? That's number one. Number two, maybe you assess it's not that. And you do need to make a subtle change or a large change in your training. Okay, great. That's the place that I would start. Go after that. If you have been doing high repetition stuff for a long time, maybe go lower and heavier. If you've been doing the opposite, then maybe go the opposite, right? So you've been doing really a ton in that 6 to 15 repetition range. Maybe you need to go the opposite and do a whole block, maybe 4 to 6 weeks, where you're doing mostly 20s, 25s, things like that. So do something the total opposite could be a way to go as well. Then from there, we're getting down to okay, this is where precision matters. So maybe we now need to get blood work done, not from a medical perspective, not from cardiovascular health perspective. We need to look at this from a high performance perspective. This is what we do at one of my companies, Vitality Blueprint. It is performance-based blood work. So you're not going to be told about your risk of a heart disease 25 years. It is, what are you doing? Hydration, performance, recovery for getting the most gains possible. Maybe something like that needs to get done. Maybe there's something that's slightly off. Maybe some marker is just a little bit tweaked outside of a range. It's not in a medical disease range, but it's suboptimal for high performance. Maybe it's high precision nutrition. You got to get something down where it's not just about your macros. So one of the major mistakes we see a lot is calories determine in large part how you look. Macros are going to determine how you feel. Micronutrients determine how you perform. Very few people actually program micronutrient level vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals. It's just sort of like, here are your calories, here's your macros. Most people, that's all you need. But this person maybe needs down to that micro level, and we need to start getting into the micronutrients that you're after. It's sometimes little things like that. Again, that's not the place to start. Most people don't need to get to that level, but we do. And you absolutely might have to if that's the kind of person you're describing at that level and they know exactly where their calories are at. They know where their macros are at. They weigh and measure their food for years. They eat the same things, and now you're at that level. It's not just a macro issue, probably. Now it's probably a micronutrient.
What's your thoughts on pre-workout carbohydrates? Because I saw a study recently where they were claiming that pre-workout carbohydrates doesn't actually have a huge impact on your performance. Do you agree with that?
It's context. So, are you working out fasted? Are you working out twice a day? Was the study in untrained people or really highly trained people? Were they trying to maximize fat loss or muscle gain or strength? Were they in a out of season phase? Were they in season? Were they hypercaloric or hypocaloric? What was the source of carbohydrate? What was the rest of their meals like? So it's not that I believe it or don't believe it. I believe I believe the data in the study. Now, how do I implement those recommendations? Now it depends on context, right? So everything that we need to know the rest of the situation. It's not just about that one study with that one scenario. You got to fold that into the greater evidence-based literature, as well as my coaching experience and athlete preference. Well, the one thing about carbohydrates is you've got to be cognizant of GI distress at that point. So, okay, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but so many factors have to go in that decision before we decide how to integrate or not integrate information like that.
Mm-hmm. I think the study was claiming that assuming that your glycogen stores are full before the session, then the effect is not going to be that much of a difference.
Makes sense.
But as you said, that there's so many variables. It just depends.
Yeah, it depends on what performance, right? Was this a 60-minute time trial on a bike? Was this intervals? Was this lifting? Was it
I think this was like a typical 60-minute lifting session.
Okay, so again, what were the level of the participants training-wise? What was the style of training? Was it more powerlifting style? Was it more bodybuilding style? So again, lots of factors going there. And then also at the end of the day, it's only one study.
Yeah.
Let's see if it's duplicated.
You know, you mentioned you did the blood work to look into optimizing performance. Is that something readily available for everyone, or just for people in the States?
If you actually,
because I'm interested in that.
If you want to get the blood draw done itself, then that's pretty much only available in the States. But we do have a program called manual upload. So if you have your data and you want to upload your data directly, our software will then analyze, interpret, and tell you exactly what to do about it, from the nutrition, then again down to the micronutrient, supplementation, and lifestyle perspective. And you can toggle it and sort of change how much emphasis you might put on it. But that is something that is, if it's not currently available, you're talking probably weeks away. But yeah, that is there. And that has been because of our enormous international demand. It is really, really hard for us to facilitate blood work in every different country. It's complete bananas. So the only way to get to that now is, again, say like, here are the data that you need to get or get close, and then enter your data manually, and then our software will take it from there.
Okay. Interesting.
But yeah, we've actually had that for quite some time internally. So I got you.
Awesome. I know you've got to bounce for your next meeting. I've got literally a million questions. I could keep going all day, but hopefully when I head over to the States, we can link up and do something. Probably be next year at some point. But I appreciate everything you're doing and all the knowledge that you're spreading. I wish this was readily available when I got started with my lifting. I remember when I did my personal training certification, which was done over like a 6-week period. It was, I mean, I could just sit down and listen to a couple of your podcasts, and I would have learned more from them than I did from doing that course.
Yeah. Well, I had a blast, man. Really great questions. This was super fun. So I appreciate you having me.
Awesome. And where can people find you?
If you want to check out the podcast, it's called Perform with Dr. Andy Galpin. That's it's a little bit different. There's no guests. It was just 10 episodes. So you can go binge watch the entire thing. Season 2 will be out next year. but that is up and available. And then Twitter and Instagram, Dr. Andy Galpin are the best ways to keep relevant. They're science communication tools for me. So that's basically all I put up. So all those places are a good way to get caught up on everything that I've got out there and to see what's coming new.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Andy. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it, man.